Julie and Sean. Thanks, you guys, for presenting.
Thanks, Eileen.
All right. Thank you very much, Eileen. And thank you to my co-presenters. I'm Dave McNeil, and we also have Julie Glassmeyer and Sean Greystone joining us. I think you can see us all. We'll wave. So the agenda for today, it's to go over the 21 most common mistakes that we see as coaches on projects when deploying Lean and Last Planner system. A lot of the issues that we have and see are usually as a result of not doing parts and pieces of Lean. And like Fujio Cho from Toyota said, it's not about any individual part or piece, it's about having them all together as a system. So I think you'll see that as a common thread as we go through here, that it's really just relating all of these things to what you're doing. I personally had a big struggle when I first started doing Lean because I didn't understand it all. And I just cherry picked a few things that I thought made sense to me, and I threw a bunch of it off and got good at the 5 or 6 things that we did try, but then realized later, like, oh, we really should be doing these other things. And it was hard to get them back on and being adopted by the teams that were used to just doing parts and pieces. So what we're going to talk about is when Sean is going to kick us off here in just a second with some high-level Lean and Last Planner system issues, cultural type issues, kind of thinking issues about the overall process. Then we're going to jump into really the nuts and bolts. Julie's going to talk a lot about the milestones, issues with milestones, pull planning. I think a lot of these issues and mistakes are around pull planning that we see. So I think a lot of us are going to be talking about different parts of pull planning. We're going to go into make-ready planning issues, weekly work planning, and then the learning. The Q&A, it says in there, I think, please enter your questions in the chat, but I think Eileen said, please use the question box that you have in the go-to control panel, wherever it may be on your screen. And with that, I will turn it over to Sean to kick us off.
Hi, everybody. Good day, especially to our friends who are kind of across large waters. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, David. I'm just going to jump right into this. As we said earlier, this is not only for common mistakes in Last Planner system, but this is for common mistakes in the application of Lean. So for me, right at the very start of this is an understanding that Lean is not the application of the Last Planner system. Lean is not using choosing by advantages to make good decisions. It's not using 5 S's on a job site. It's really what to me is most critically understated is it's a paradigm shift and it's a cultural change. So we have a giant toolbox filled with great tools which enhance the participants' abilities to develop the type of thinking necessary to become part of the cultural change. A friend of ours named Dan Fauché has a wonderful paper about how the practice of the Last Planner system itself instills collaborative behavior in the people who are practicing it. But what needs to be understood most clearly is this is a cultural change, and this is a paradigm shift for those of us who came up, particularly those of us who came up in traditional construction procurement, low bid, design bid build type of scenarios. The entire approach, just like Last Planner system plans backwards in a sense, our approach to the entire Lean engagement is different than the standard approach that modern construction for the last 150 years has practiced. 2 of the most critical sustaining elements of that, beyond the understanding that it's not just a toolbox, it's not just behavioral changes, but it's a cultural paradigm shift, is the understanding that Lean also supports 2 thoughts, which is the continuous improvement is necessary. There's a beautiful story by Nicholas Modig talking about a man named Obusan who went to check out a large factory, and they kept asking him all day, are you lean, are you lean? And he would say, I can't tell you, I can't tell you. And at the end of the day, when they got frustrated, he said, basically, I can't tell you because I've spent the entire day touring the facility today. When I come back tomorrow, if you've made 1 change in anything that you've shown me today, then you're lean. If you haven't, then you're not. So the concept of continuous improvement is critical. If we're doing routines and not examining how we're doing them and looking for ways to make them better, then we're failing in one aspect. And the final point is we understand that respect for people stands at the core and the center of this entire paradigm shift. And so it's really critically important to understand that.
I'm excited.
Also, Also, go ahead, David, what are you going to comment on? What do you think there's an approach in lean understanding that ties into the respect for people element, which is the fact that we don't make statements, we ask questions. Good coaches, facilitators, leaders understand that the team are the source of the solutions that you need, and understanding how to draw out the best capacities of the members who make up your team, who are people who need to be respected, is critical to understanding how to create a successful high-intensity lean engagement. Mistake number 2, thinking lean is only for the frontline workers. This ties very much into what I started saying at the last slide. If you practice the last planner system, that's great. You are going to have improvements. If that's the only thing that you do, that's the only change related to something lean, quote unquote, that you read about that you end up doing, even if you don't implement all 5 parts of it, even if you only do, I don't know, master planning with your trade partners involved, or weekly huddles without everyone, it's still better than nothing, but that's not the point. Okay, so the point is along with this cultural paradigm shift that has to go on and the thinking shift that has to go on, lean is not for the frontline workers. Lean has to be adopted and supported at the highest levels of the administrative field for any construction group or owners group or trade partner group or anyone else who's looking to implement lean at a serious level. It has to be adopted by the senior leadership. It has to be adopted by the finance department. It has to be adopted by the pre-con department. It has to be adopted by the field. It has to be adopted by your trade partners. It has to be adopted by your supply chain critical players. And when you do that, you create a very large engagement out of which we draw this network of reliable commitments, which makes up the understanding of how lean moves from one thing to the other. And the last planner system is in itself just a way of outlining this network of reliable commitments. So the leadership has to be engaged. They must participate as much as possible. The field has to be supported by top of house. And we change a lot of the language in the way that we talk. We not only have terms that are specific to lean, PPC, which is percent of plan complete, when you're looking at how many tasks did team members commit to in a week and how many did they actually achieve, countermeasures for variances, the understanding of words like constraints and logs and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But we also referred to subcontractors as trade partners now. They're not subcontractors, not beneath anybody else. And so there's an entire language shift that comes along with adopting the lean paradigm change. And we are deeply into improvement through lessons learned. The concept of the fact that there are no mistakes within the lean paradigm. There are only learning opportunities and ways for us to improve ourselves, learn by our mistakes, and apply them. That's the application of the Deming cycle and the plan, do, check, act cycle, and all that kind of stuff. We're constantly looking, which goes back to the first tile, which is continuous improvement. And the fact that if you're not applying continuous improvement to the methods in which you're practicing your lean engagements, you're not really being lean. So, and the third.
All right.
So where are we?
Number 3.
We already do lean. Okay, so we all do. You're looking at some well-weathered professionals. I don't mean that anybody looks any older than I do. I'm the oldest and crustiest looking of everybody here. But we have all been doing this for a long time, and we hear a lot of things. And one of the things I hear very often is, "Oh, we practiced lean, or we already did lean, and lean didn't work." And when you get a little bit deeper into it, you ask, "Well, what did you actually do?" And they went, "Well, we held daily huddles, or we held weekly huddles." But they didn't do pool planning, and they didn't know what the last planner system was, and they didn't understand anything from 5 S's to target value, delivery to whatever. It makes no difference. They didn't have any concept of the other elements of the lean toolbox, right? So, and then they go, well, we tried it and it didn't work. So the understanding is doing lean is practicing this continuous improvement cycle every second of every day in every level of operations that you have, from the very highest level of the top floor of the headquarters all the way out to the warehouses where your drywall is being stored. Okay, so I mean, this is across the board application, and nobody's already doing lean completely. Even the leanest practitioners we've ever met, what they're doing is they're doing the thing that came from the Nicholas Modig story. They're looking for ways to improve. We went through our operations in this division today. We think we have ways to improve this, make less accidents, make a smoother delivery of an option, make sure someone has something on time, whatever it is, make sure the human potential is being fulfilled correctly. So along with that, this is absolutely the case. Some people go, well, this means we have to throw out all this other stuff we're doing. It's like, no, you don't have to throw it out. What you have to do is reorganize. There's a beautiful little piece on 5S, which is sorting and shining and making your spaces organized. And this is organizing the way we do things. It's not organizing the tools. It's no different than organizing a job box, except we're going to organize the way that we interact with each other and commitments that we make and how we treat one another. We have to understand that every process is subject to improvement. And The way to do this is to train, and we can't emphasize this enough. It has been shown that training overcomes every other type of behavior variation that there is. Do any reading at all on growth versus fixed mindset, and watch Renee Chang's beautiful 5-minute video on 5 misconceptions for integrated project delivery, where the myth that you have to have the A team to get your stuff performed is necessary. That's absolutely not the case. Training makes all the difference in the world. What you don't need is the A team. What you need is a well-trained team who trust one another and know how to work together well.
All right. Thanks, Sean. Moving on to Julie.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm excited. This webinar is every coach's dream. We get to take all the mistakes we see and tell a big group of people about them. Thank you for being here. What I get to talk about for the next few slides are milestones, and then those milestones kind of moving into the phase pool plan. And if you think about your master plan, your milestone schedule, whatever you call it, basically that first schedule that's put together at the beginning of any project, it sets the foundation for all of the lean and last planner tools that we're going to implement going forward. So it's key, even if the last planners themselves are not a part of putting that milestone plan together. If it's done by the leadership team alone, or as is becoming more common, that it is collaborative. Either way, there are a lot of things we need to think about and keep at top of mind as we're putting that together and then moving toward those phase pool plans. So my first mistake that I get to talk about, mistake number 4, is that the milestones are not clearly defined. And if you think about it, both on the design and the construction side of the projects that we work on, different terms have different meanings. If you think about sitting down and doing a milestone for the design of a project, and I might say we're in SDs. Okay, well, that's fine. My electrical engineer may have one idea of what that means, and my mechanical engineer may have a different idea of what that means, which documents and deliverables are a part of it. So we need to define it. We need to make sure that it's clear to the whole team. Same thing on the construction side. I can say my milestone is dry-in. Okay, well, in my mind, maybe dry-in means the roof is complete, the gutters are all on, the entire drainage system is in, the windows are done, all of the caulking is complete. Someone else may think, okay, we've got the roof pretty much done and we've got visqueen over the windows and temporary storm drains. That's an important differentiation to make. And so regardless of how we're putting our milestones together, we need to be sure that we're defining that and then following up by actually communicating it. So taking that time at the beginning of phase pool plan to ensure that everyone knows, and being open to the idea that there may be different definitions, and maybe those definitions are better for the planning, and being able to collaboratively move forward with those defined terms. Without identifying those milestones clearly, it's impossible for the last planners to identify which activities are definitely a part of that phase of work that we're doing. When you're putting your milestone plan together, as this last bullet here says, and you're wondering which milestones should I include, think about the ones that are going to release work. For example, I mentioned dry-in. Dry-in is going to release the finishes work. So those are the ones we want to ensure that we're including in there. And then this next slide is going to talk about some other things to keep in mind as far as the milestones go. So mistake number 5, we often put durations between our milestones that are just too large. And that can be specifically for the pool plans. It can be in our milestone plan. And if you think about it, we could have an overall completion date. And I can say my finish milestone is August 22nd, 2022. Okay, well, that's nice for everybody to know, and that might be in the contract, and we might all say, yes, we can do it. But it doesn't create that path that we can progress down through our pool plans, working together to come up with a reliable, a logical sequence of work that will actually get us there when we need to. So we're going to want those intermediate ones, and most contracts have them. I've mentioned dry-in. We've got the different phases of design. Top out might be one, rough-in being complete. But then we need to look and say, okay, what are those intermediate milestones that we should include? And one of the things that we've seen a lot, I know Dave's seen it, I think Sean's seen it, and I really like is you can go into a conference room of a last planner system project, and they'll actually have the milestone plan up around, like in a ribbon around the room, so that everybody who comes in there knows what those milestones are and they stay focused and at front of mind. And then finally, if you want to really work to get those good sequences together and identify those intermediates, look for doing smaller phases of work as a pool plan so the team gets better and better at it, and we get those smaller batches that help us to progress the work toward the end. Move on to number 6, which is similar to what we were just talking about, and that's the idea of biting off more than you can chew in a pool plan. So we've talked about we've got to have the good milestones, we've got to have them at the right spacing, but now we're going to be in the pool plan, and we're tempted because we want to be efficient. We want to get the topics covered that all the people in the room can discuss. We want to get as much planned as we possibly can at once. And so we kind of look off and our eyes are bigger than our stomachs, so to speak, if you think about it. And we don't get it all finished. So first thing we need to do is make sure that we know what our desired outcome is from the session. So we want to focus our pool plan on just one phase of work. If you look at a time frame, you may say, okay, well, we're going to be doing this and this and this, and you may find yourself doing finishes and landscaping all in the same thing. It needs to be all one pool plan, one phase that is related to each other so that it's logical, reliable, and you can have the right people there. We only want to invite the related parties. So if you don't have activities that are a part of that pool plan, you shouldn't be in that session, because that's going to, first of all, waste those people's time, which is disrespectful, but it's also going to lead to tangent conversations that aren't related to the matter at hand. And then finally, keeping in mind these different kind of rules of thumb for what the time frame should be that you're working toward. If you're doing new construction, trying to keep it to about 10 to 12 weeks for new construction, and then 6 to 8 weeks if you're doing a renovation, because they can get a lot more complicated, and then 26 weeks for design is about how far you can go out, and that makes it manageable for around a 4-hour session that you're doing in your pool plan. So let's move on to number 7. And then number 7, conducting pool plans just prior to the start of work. Planning is key to everything that we're doing, and I know everybody wants to plan. And one of the mistakes that we make is doing that planning kind of at the last minute. One of the benefits of planning is that we have time to make adjustments. We have time to change things. We have time in that planning to do something that's outside of the original plan that we put into place. And if we do our pool plans a week before that phase of work is supposed to start, we're taking away a lot of that power. So the goal is that we conduct pool plans ideally 6 weeks prior to the start of that phase. That gives us plenty of time to handle constraints that are identified during it. So any obstacles that might get in the way of doing it. It gives us time to make adjustments and do things differently than we were expecting to. It gives us time to get the resources that we need for anything we've decided there. Now, granted, sometimes 6 weeks is hard to do, especially at the very beginning of a project. You don't have the whole buyout done. You don't know who all your last planners are. But we want to get as close to that as we possibly can to give ourselves that flexibility to ensure that the plan we put into place is in fact reliable.
All right.
Next.
Okay, so I'll take it from here, at least for the short term. Mistake number 8, insufficient preparation for the pool plan. A lot of times you hear about pool plans that didn't go well. Either they didn't have the right people in the room, they sent somebody that didn't know anything about the job, and you just don't get the real value out of it. And a lot of times it becomes wasted time. So a lot of times I relate that back to the preparation. Did we give proper notice, right? 2 weeks or so in advance, because people are generally committing a half a day of their time to these pool plans. And not just sending out the email reminders, following up with phone calls, making sure that the right person's there. A lot of times I get the question of who should be there. Does it need to be a foreman? Does it need to be a superintendent? Does it need to be, and I say, well, I don't know. Everybody's company is different, and every title means a little bit different as far as what they're able to do and make commitments. But that's the big thing is the person that needs to show up to the pull plan needs to be able to make commitments on behalf of that company to say, yes, I can have 8 painters on site for 7 weeks to get this phase of work knocked out. You don't want just, a lot of people want to push it down deep to the foreman, which is good because you want to have somebody that can speak to the work, but a lot of times they don't have the ability to make commitments. So that's a key element there. So a lot of times I'll say it's typically a superintendent and a project manager type that needs to be representing trades, but they got to be able to commit. The location, on site, if you're doing it in a trailer, can be fine, but sometimes trailers can be noisy. There's coming and goings, there's jackhammers running outside, and it might not be conducive to a good pull plan. Off-site sometimes can be a little bit better. There's usually a little price involved there, but you get people focused if you're doing it in person and you're doing it off-site. So getting a room at a local Holiday Inn or something like that for the morning or afternoon can be a best practice. Virtual can be a big one. And I think I was originally very anti-virtual prior to COVID and kind of had to become virtual. And I do think there's definitely some benefits there. So I think it allows a lot of people to attend. And the only problem with virtual is sometimes you get people on phones or iPads and they're out on a site and they're not really conducive to being in there manipulating the pull plans and things. So making sure that people know that they're going to be required to participate on a PC or a laptop and should be on a wired connection is important as far as the location. The room setup, I'll make this available to anybody that wants to shoot me an email after this. I'll send you my setup checklist for doing pull plans and boot camps in person, as far as the room setup, as far as food and drinks and markers and painter's tape and all the different supplies you would need to do pull plans in person. I'm happy to send that out. Name tags, especially when you're doing pull plans for the first time. And one of my rules is you always have name tags, and especially if you have anybody new to the room. If there's one new person in the room, everybody should have a name tag on, because a lot of times this is the first time people have met, you know, about this project. Yeah, company A's worked with company B, but maybe not Bob or Susie. They might not know each other. So always go with those name tags when you're doing pull planning. And then onboarding, you know, giving people a little bit of a heads up on what's going to be going on. Julie's going to talk a little bit about this more later towards the end here, but making sure you're welcoming them, making sure they're understanding what they're going to be required to do, and just kind of give them that heads up. And maybe it's a 15-minute, half-hour sit down prior to the meeting with a couple of them to walk through it, or even earlier than right before the meeting, so they can come prepared. Next mistake is number 9, taking shortcuts. I see people all the time wanting to let's do a shortcut. Let's just make this go really quick, and so it's only an hour and a half or something. And shortcuts generally degrade the quality of what you're doing. Sometimes I've seen groups just throw up the contract schedule on a screen and say, okay, does everybody agree to this? And everybody kind of nods, and then they're like, okay, we're done. We did our pull plan. And that is not pull planning, I'll tell you that. Some people like to shortcut sometimes and fill out sticky notes in advance. That can be done if you've done a prep session in advance, and if everything's very clear on what you're actually tackling. Like Julie said, what is the milestone, what's included, what's not. Those are all very important things. So my general thought is to kind of set aside that contract schedule and start with kind of that blank piece of paper. We know what the contract says. Let's just set it aside, or let's just look at it in the beginning and say, okay, we need to be dried in by Thanksgiving. Okay, and then just kind of set it down. Let's just talk about what are the elements that we got to put together to get to that dry in, right? The curtain wall, the glazing, the storefront, the doors, the windows, the roof, the gutters, caulking, whatever it may be, and just focus on that. not trying to fit into a schedule. So often we try to do that, or we get out oh no, it says I'm going to start roofing, August 15th. Well, you may be starting July 15th if we do better on our work. So don't get wrapped around the axle with the contract schedule, at least out of the gate. Allow enough time to do it. Typically in person, it's usually a 3 or 4 hour. With virtual, if we're doing some setups in advance, you can shorten that maybe to 2 to 3 hours, but generally not less than that, unless it's a very small focus scope of work. If you're doing phased pull planning, and again, my definition of pull planning is phases. Weekly work planning and doing weekly with sticky notes, that's not pull planning in my vernacular. That's just weekly work planning with sticky notes. Nothing wrong with it, but that's not what I call pull planning. Pull planning is phases of work. If you're doing them in person, the third bullet there, you want to I usually spend the first 45 minutes to an hour just setting things up. If we did not do a prior session, if it's just the first time everybody's coming in. You really have to lay out that groundwork, and I'm going to talk about that, I think, in mistake number 10 coming up. And do those prep sessions. That became a real necessity during COVID, and I think it's definitely a best practice, and I'm going to continue to do it after COVID. Even if I'm doing an in-person pull plan, I'll do a virtual setup session and then get together in person to actually do the manipulation of the stickies and making the commitments. And those setup sessions usually can take an hour and a half to 2 hours. I would expect to do those. It's not as clean and simple as a lot of people think it is. And so in general, don't try to take shortcuts. All right, mistake 10, the groundwork that I mentioned earlier. Not laying that groundwork is usually the cause of most pull plans to fail or be ineffective. So you want to go through introductions of the players. You want to talk about the overview, the goals, what are the outcomes that we're looking for in this session. And then the next two bullets are really some of the key elements that you want to set up going into a pull plan. Like Julie said, what is that milestone definition? What does it look like? What are all the elements? What's the work breakdown? What are all the activities? And when I'm doing pull planning, I like to describe it as baking a cake. Right, first thing at the top of a recipe is all the ingredients, right? I need 10 eggs, 2 cups of flour, 4 cups of water, sugar, all the different things. So you need to know what are all the elements. Then you need to put them in the right batting order, kind of what's added first, what's added second, what's added third. That's that work breakdown in sequence. That's kind of that third bullet, kind of starting at the beginning and just listing out all the activities that you've got. Back up to the second bullet there. You want to identify those tact areas. So tact is that German word for beat or rhythm or pace. So how do we break this down so we can get people in different areas, and then once one moves out, the other moves in? And for most construction work, that's 1 week. 1 week is our tact, right? How much work can we do in 1 week and then move on and somebody else can move in? And good rule of thumb is about 8,000 square feet or 2,000 square meters. I learned that from the Germans at BMW, who are very dialed into tact planning. So and it seems to work out well. You also want to talk about the flow of work. What's our marching order? How are we working this job, east to west, north to south? Make sure everybody's on the same page. Then get the trades talking, right? That's that fourth bullet. Get them describing what is ideal for them, right? So often we think as general contractors, we need to tell the trades what they need to do. And sometimes that's the case, but more often they've got a plan. So I think pull planning is kind of getting everybody's plan and kind of combining them and making sure they're in sync, right? And identifying where they're not in sync with each other. Then we also want to capture those constraints. That's where the constraint capture comes into play. Starts with pull planning. Generally, a pull plan populates 10, 12, 15. I've had 50 constraints pop out of a pull plan that people have to go wrestle down to the ground. And also ask for innovation. Ask, is there better ways to do this? Is there a different way we could approach this? Especially if the plan doesn't work, which happens quite often, and it's longer than we wanted it to be. What can we do differently? Can we prefab parts of this? Can we do it in a different sequence? Can we cut down our areas and go faster, right? So there's a lot of ways to get that going faster if you need to, but innovation is something we generally don't ask for enough, in my opinion. All right. Next one, choosing the wrong format. It's really, I see a lot of times this swim lane. So that's one of my big pet peeves is the first bullet there. Swim lanes by trade. So I don't like to see, concrete, a line for all the concrete work, and then a line for all the steel work, and then a line for all the electrical work, and then a line for all the mechanical. Swim lanes, like the second bullet says, are okay for different areas. Like, oh, here's our first floor, and then another swim lane for the second floor, or the other building, or the other piece of the design. So it's fine for that, but I don't like putting it in different swim lanes by responsible party, because you can't see the relationship very easily. Blank paper, yeah, I like blank paper. Sometimes I'll go and put lines on it, the width of the sticky note, to make sure to keep it nice and clean and organized, kind of by weeks. And that's very easy to do in the virtual cloud software that's out there to keep that kind of organized. The thing I like about virtual software is that you can make it as big as you want. Sometimes when you're in person, you're limited to a 36-inch tall piece of butcher paper or plotter paper, but you can do something as tall as a house virtually, which is kind of cool. Time scale, that's one that I always struggle with, to include or not to include. I've had clients say, I don't want until the very end to talk about the time or the timing when it starts. So the thought process is, we want to figure out the length of the train. How long is this set of activities? Is it 50 days? Is it 65 days? Is it 29 days? And then we know when that train leaves the station. If it leaves on July 1st, it's 29 days. If it leaves on December 1st, it's still 29 days. So then you can kind of put the dates in later, because a lot of times people get wrapped around the axle with the dates. Again, long procurement items, you need to have that thought process. Like, I cannot get countertops here until December 1st, right? So there are some elements where it brings in, but generally I like to talk about the high level, like, hey, we just need to get this phase done by Christmas or by the next holiday, by the 4th of July. And then work it out the length of the train, and then figure out what the dates are kind of at the end. That's kind of my general process. Julie, Sean, anything to add on that? Oops, changed my screen there. I might have changed it for everybody too. There we go. Are we back?
We're back.
We're back. Okay. All right. Next up, back to Sean. I think Sean, I think your coffee's probably settled in now. I think you're not on that super coffee high that you were in the beginning.
That's what I heard.
Okay.
I was just watching the clock, you guys. So if everybody thinks I talk too fast,
You're good.
I got
We're
plenty of
45
messages. Talk slower. So anyway, all really valid points, by the way, and there's a lot to discuss. And one of the reasons we're kind of pushing through a little harder than usual is we think some of the most valuable time to be
Sean,
spent.
I actually am going to interrupt you. We have a question that came in for David that I actually want to ask right now, since it was about one of the previous mistakes that's specific to that mistake. The question is, if not swim lanes for trades, what is recommended format? What's the recommended format for the trades?
Oh, good question. So I kind of like, I like more to have kind of a free flowing based on the main handoff. So I like to find out what's really driving the bus, who's really the critical activities. So I want to make sure that's first. So I'll just use a quick little example to kind of illustrate how I do the sticky. So if, without going backwards, this is just kind of forward thinking. So if the concrete is the driver in the beginning, creating the foundations, right? So for a couple of weeks, they're the most critical, right? Getting in foundations, and then they continue their foundation work, but then we need to be starting structural steel, right? So then structural steel is then kind of dominating. So at my top row of sticky notes, it would be concrete footings, concrete footings, concrete footings. Then we may continue, but I would drop those sticky notes down to show, like in week 4, steel starting. Okay, then it's steel, 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 steel for 5, 6, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever it is. And then at some point, there's elements that jump in there, and it's either pouring slab on metal decks, or at the end, then we've got, roofing and cladding and things that are part of or attaching to the steel. So I like the top row of sticky notes to be the critical activities when they're the drivers, because that also helps me later on when I go look and do a 6-week look ahead, that I can see, what are my critical activities now? And then other things are just happening, right? We're just doing up some other things, and those are down in the lower end in the pull plan. But at my top, I want the top to kind of be my critical path. So that's why the swim lanes, that's why I'm kind of anti-trade swim lanes, if that makes sense.
Can I jump in real quick, Dave?
Please.
If you look at a pull plan the way Dave is describing it, it ends up ultimately for most phases looking like an upside down bell curve, which is pretty cool. But the idea is there are no lanes. You're putting them up there based on the triggers or the predecessors that are being called out by the trade that just put their sticky note up there. And so it's, like he said earlier, very free flowing going through, and they're not categorized by trade. Like you said, that top row becomes the critical path and everything else is shown beneath so that you can get that relativity of how everything's working together.
Yeah. And if you have any further things, put an additional question in and we'll keep going with Sean. Go ahead, Sean. And we're good on time too, Sean. We're not in any hurry.
Yeah, and I was just looking at that. I think it's great. And these are good questions, and actually sometimes more relevant to just deal with the questions when this is all fresh on our mind. And I have to say, there is very little on these 21 major deals that we couldn't get into deep length discussions about anyway. So anyway, going along with all the conversations relative to what goes up on the wall, what doesn't go up on the wall, when it goes up on the wall, how it goes up on the wall. Basically, if anybody's been in a gymnasium, if anyone's a workout rat of any kind or another, you know that there's something called gym etiquette. So if you're in a gym with a whole bunch of other people, you rack your weights some way, you know how to work in, you know how to ask politely, you know how to stay off other people's machines, you know how to put things away, you know how to wipe down, you know how to stay everybody else's way, you know how to not interrupt anybody else's routines, all that kind of stuff. The big room and the places where you pull your pull planning sessions are, they have a set of rules as well. And we find that sometimes, just like in good practices for professional aspects of what we do, there's a sequence to things, and we do a lot of them without really knowing why, but after some years of practice, we begin to understand why there are rules like don't touch anybody else's sticky note without their knowledge, permission, participation, input, awareness, and commitment to the fact that some task that has nothing to do with you is being reassigned by you for someone else who has to actually perform the task. So the whole concept of how sticky notes go up on the wall is really interesting, and it moves through. We've had some internal discussions about this. All of us belong to a coaching group that we have continuous discussions about best practices and how we're doing this and whether we should change this and what do you think and how this work out. But the concept of posting sticky notes randomly, I'm going to give you my summary. David will give you a slightly different one. Julie will give you a slightly different one, but we all have a pretty much similar approach to the fact. The only time I allow the posting of sticky notes randomly, which ties into a point that David made earlier, which is some people who come with their sticky notes prepared, which in some cases is fine, as long as they're not tied to those sticky notes and they understand that during the pull planning session, the note 7 that they had is irrelevant and doesn't belong there and something else completely different does, and they have to be aware of it, right? But the whole concept of the fact that sticky note etiquette, it really needs to be maintained, because as David mentioned this when we were having a conversation about it, that wall can descend into chaos. Like that wall can descend into absolute chaos. And one needs to remember the sticky notes are nothing but guidelines for the conversations. It's conversations that are critical. The sticky notes are irrelevant in a certain sense. I'm trying to, I may sound paradoxical, but the whole point of the sticky notes is to drive the person at the transition points between one series of tasks and another series of tasks. It drives the two people responsible for the handoff, like in a relay race, together so that they can coordinate the handoff. Because it turns out that handoffs and how the handoffs are translated between one working group to another working group, same thing as Toyota assembling at one station to another station, becomes critical. Handoffs are critical. And so if we understand that the posting of sticky notes is really the outline layout of our commitment map, then we understand how dangerous posting sticky notes randomly can be. We understand how using the wrong color, we understand that mixing and scrambling stuff up. When you walk in the room and nobody else is in the room, and you get into your own self-thinking session, you start moving sticky notes around, that's about as forbidden as it gets. I mean, there's things that can absolutely screw up other people's ability to complete the commitments that they make. So we understand that pull planning, as we've been describing it, is actually a radical change from the standard Gantt chart critical path method of planning, right? We are planning from the end, not from the beginning. We move backwards and see where the commitment chain gets created, and then we work off of that. And we do go back and forth. So people say we just go backwards, that's a mistake too. We start backwards to do a preliminary layout as far as sequencing of work is concerned. But then when you get into the weeds of each deal, whether you're at the phases or whether you're at the weeklies, it doesn't matter. The interior of that changes, which is why one of the other comments about what both Julie and David said is understand that pool planning boards are living documents. They really are, and they change, and they are supposed to change. And so a series of changes that come up because a constraint got hit that wasn't expected somewhere, which causes a rippling effect all the way down the sequence over the 6-week look at into the phase plan, that still needs to be translated to the phase plan. I mean, these are living documents that have to talk to one another currently, so the more accurate the information on them is, the more accurate your long-term look ahead and ability to make these commitments becomes. So I hope I'm being very clear and making sense. This is slightly abstract, but this is really critical to this.
No, I like the one, Sean, about nobody moves anybody else's. That's one I'm on as well too, for sure.
Yeah, it's a critical point. And the same thing again with random. Poor or non-existent follow-up after a pool planning session. This ties into the fact that the pool planning session itself is not an end result. The pool planning session is one step in a series of sequential actions which need to take place for us to control the placement of work. This is what this is about. So we understand that when we do a good pool planning session, what we've got is the outline that we're going to take with us and lay out for the next 6 weeks worth of work. And we refer to this outline constantly, but every week it changes because people make commitments, don't make the commitments, things don't show up, things do show up, things show up ahead of schedule. You have to move somewhere because of a clash in locations, whatever it is. So understand that we're capturing, really, I like to call them snapshots. They're really snapshots. What all these plans, whether they're 1 week, 6 week, long-term phase or master planning, they're really snapshots of our understanding of what the sequences of actions are, our supply, and a map of everything that's happening in a given moment. That changes all the time. So the reason that we bother capturing constraints, questions, issues, and needs, and all of this busyness about responsibility matrices and deciding who's responsible to take care of what, this is all related to what? This is all related to flow. And again, I want to emphasize that it's the abstracts behind the last planner system which are more important. Yes, these tools are critically important, but what we have to understand is that this all represents the paradigm change I spoke about at the beginning, and it's a shift in thinking and the way we move work from one stage to another to completion, and the flow that operates within is what becomes critical. To confirm durations and handoffs with any performers not in attendance becomes really important, but this is why there are certain things, if that's the case, you need to reevaluate the players that you have at your pool planning sessions, and you need to get more buy-in from the partners that are not supplying the personnel that you need, because really efficient pool plans that are successful have everybody's buy-in.
Yeah, and I think it speaks, Sean, sometimes to the fact that maybe somebody last minute had a kid get sick or something and couldn't make it, and we had to make some assumptions for them, right? And that does happen from time to time. And it also speaks to where we don't want to hold off doing a pool plan just because we just don't have that one contract or that 10th different person signed. Let's go on with it. Let's fill them in later. Let's make some assumptions. And so we get the benefit of doing it on time, like Julie was saying earlier. Yeah.
I agree with that, but I'll add the reminder, but you can't touch their sticky notes. You can leave them a whole bunch of questions underneath, on a diagonal, put in a bunch of questions that need to be answered. We need to know if you can this, we need to know if you can that, we need to know this and that, but leave them there, but don't touch their notes, and don't touch their notes anywhere else down the line.
Yeah, good job.
14?
Yep.
This is a continuation of really the previous thought. Being done with the pool plan, what do we have to do? We have to take it and translate it to all the other plans that are functioning at the time. There's a weekly work plan, there's a make ready work plan, and there's the daily huddle. So we have the 6-week look aheads, we have the weeklies, and we have what we're doing as a result of the weeklies, the quick tag and touch of are we on, are we not on? Okay, well, all of that sequencing has to, again, if you remember what I said about what that pool plan wall is, it is an illustration of the commitments being made. That's all it is. It's an illustration of commitments. So we carry this illustration of the commitments that we made with us all the time, and we lay them out into the other plans and make sure that we're constantly checking to make sure that that commitment is being made. That's what all these huddles, that's what all these connects are about. And you've heard me say multiple times, and you'll hear me say lots when we're doing these types of things, that it's the conversations. To me, the key, most critical issue relevant to everything that we're talking about here is focusing on the means and methods and not focusing on the conversation. The majority of the issues that we run into in clashes, failures, constraints, breaks, disconnects, have to do with the fact that someone has not had a conversation with someone else. Either 1, 2, 3, 5, 7 people, whatever it's supposed to be. So cadence, again, I like the word cadence is in there. I'm very, very stringent about cadence because cadence trains for behavior. Is it Michael Ball, B-A-L-L-E, I think, in Lean Strategy, I think, who says that we can't think our way into a new way of acting, but we can act our way into a new way of thinking. I think that's one of the most brilliant lines out there. The understanding that routine, none of us start, how do I say this? This is a different way to say this. None of us started out as brilliant last planners to start with. We've become, if we're good at what we're doing, and if anything that we're saying is a value, that has a valuable takeaway that anybody can take away from this, it comes from our banging our heads against the whiteboards for years and years and years and trying to figure out why did that not work? Well, it turns out that cadence and training is a critical issue to this. And what
the general of saying, like you said, you know, it's just the beginning. It's a rough draft. It's a beginning. It's the best we know today, and it's going to get updated down the road. It's not like locked in stone, but it's just the starting point, right?
And it will change. It's guaranteed to change. That's one of the key issues here. This is all change management.
And if I could jump in for just a second, one of the things I see a lot of my clients not doing is when they get into that weekly work planning, that 6-week and that daily huddle, they forget to connect it back to that pool plan that they've done. And they kind of get into a habit of, well, what's the path of least resistance? So you need to make a deliberate effort to be connecting each of your following planning to that pool plan that everybody did together and committed to.
And that reminds me of another tangent, actually, Julie, which is why we encourage that whatever, like, this is where big rooms on the job site really make a huge difference. You shouldn't be having all these you shouldn't have your daily huddle in a safe space separate from where you have your other major planning events. They should all be in the same room so the same information's on the board. So that if you need to refer back to something larger, sometimes, you know, when we're on a more difficult job site, or, you know, like the GC uses one of its offices, we would actually bring copies of pool planning deals that weren't available in the room, but it's just really critical. The more information you have in front of you, the better you can manage this information, is all I'm trying to say.
Agreed. All right, we'll move on. 15, Julie.
Okay, so I want to point out, I get asked often by my clients, how do I know when this is working? You know, because it's hard at the beginning to start a last planner implementation. You have to teach everybody. Learning it does not make it automatic for everybody, for really anybody at once. You've got to practice coaching. You kind of stumble through it at the beginning. So how do we know when we're really starting to get the benefits of it? How can we recognize that we're truly starting to act like a lean team? And what I will say is, when the leadership team, so say the lead architect or the construction manager team, whatever that might be, when they are no longer directing the work on a daily basis, that they move into a role of facilitators, guiders, and really getting the obstacles out of the way of the actual performers, what that means you're achieving is one of the biggest parts of lean, and honestly, my favorite part of lean, which is flow. Getting that feeling of, hey, I finished my work, now it's your turn. Getting those handoffs that are really reliable, and what happens on projects like that is they actually start to feel a little boring. So you got to remind yourself, this is how we want it to go, and we do better. So the next 3 slides have to do with flow, so I love that. But mistake number 15 is doing little or no make-ready planning for your project. And what we want to do, so when we talk about constraints, and I know we've brought it up a few times today, what we're talking about are those obstacles that could stop the work from being done according to the pool plan and according to the commitments that have been made. And our goal is to get the last planners to identify those 6 weeks in advance so that the leadership team can run ahead of them and get them out of their way, and then their commitments become more reliable and they can continue to do their work. I mean, the foremen, the design leads, they don't have control over when the owner makes a decision. They don't have control over when RFIs come in. They don't have control over when contracts are written. So we need someone from that leadership team to take the lead and say, I'm going to follow that up and I'm going to make sure that gets done before you need it done. When you're talking about it in your weekly meeting, the temptation using the make ready planning, the 6-week look ahead plan, I've seen it happen, is to read every item and go, does that still make sense? That still makes sense. You good for that? You good for that? We don't want to do that. In that meeting, create the vision, make a description. Hey, in 6 weeks, we're going to be doing the paving out in the north lot. We're going to be taking down the tower crane. We're going to be putting in the doors and windows and starting to really finish up. And then ask the group, okay, what do you envision you have to get done during that time? And is there anything that could stop you from doing it? We want that to be a really robust process, getting as many constraints onto the constraint log as possible, because the more we identify, the more we get out of the way and the more flow we can have on the project going forward. And I'm going to admit right off, this is a hard thing to get last planners to do. It takes practice, it takes reminders, and using that plus delta at the end of every one of your sessions to remind, hey, plus, we got a lot more constraints today. Delta, we really need a lot more constraints next week, and keep it top of mind for those last planners so we can get more. And then number 16, which also leads into flow, which is ensuring that the last planners, well, the mistake is that last planners are not listing workable backlog on their weekly work plans. Workable backlog is your plan B. There are a lot of reasons we would need that plan B. Either you can't get your work done for some reason, someone else wasn't able to do their work, a delivery didn't come in, an RFI didn't get answered, something like that. Or it could be something like, hey, we finished 2 days early and we just didn't even see that coming. The point is being ready, knowing work that isn't critical and isn't on the weekly work plan, but can be done to continue to advance the work and to keep the teams busy and productive is key. So we want to be asking everybody at the meeting, what are you going to do if you get stopped and you can't do work? And the reason I like people to say it out loud in the meeting, a lot of people have it in their little, pocket, here's my plan B, here's what I'm going to do, is because first of all, I want to know as part of the leadership team that you've been thinking about it and it's been planned. But second, you may think it's okay to do that work if something happens, but the electrician may disagree completely with you. And so say it out loud. That way the rest of the team has an opportunity to say, well, nope, that's not going to work. And then finally, we want to make sure people are starting to think beyond the week that we're in right now. What are some of my workable backlog items that I could do next week? What are these things that aren't critical but are going to need to be done? And then that's going to help our flow and help us to actually finish sooner, because those are the items that usually get left till the end because they're not the critical ones.
Yeah, I'll tell a quick story. That I had a superintendent once who was asking and asking and asking for workable backlog, and none of the trades were ever putting any on there. And so then he finally said, this was a hospital project, and he's like, you know what? I know you have workable backlog. I'm going to start putting it on there. So he took the initiative and went out and said, okay, Bob, I know you're not done with this, and this, and you got this you got to fix, and this has got to be done over here. And then he made it. And the workable backlog activities became longer than the actual production activities because he included them for everybody, right? It's there, and it's like Julie said, it's hard to get people to talk about it, to bring it out, to think about it. They get tunnel vision. We're so focused on this week, I can't think about down the road, but you got to do it to avoid those clashes when you get ahead. And that's one of the benefits of lean is you get ahead. What you thought was going to take you 5 days, you get done in 3 days. And then what are you going to do with your crews? Well, you're going to keep them busy. You're not going to send them home. And then you don't want them jumping into something that's going to cause problem or paint somebody else into a corner.
Exactly. Mess up the sequence going forward because you had time.
Exactly.
Right.
All right.
And then my last flow slide is mistake number 17, which is the production leads are not reviewing the weekly work plan prior to the meeting. And by production leads, that's that leadership team I was talking about before. So it may be the lead designer and that team, it may be the CM and their team, but making sure that prior to going into that weekly meeting, you've had the last planners submit their weekly work plans, or if you're using the planning boards, that they've come in and they've put their stickies up to show what they're going to be planning to be doing that's going to be discussed. And then the leadership team needs to be reviewing that and coming up with questions. Hey, according to the pool plan, you're not supposed to be doing this activity for another 4 weeks. And this activity that you don't have up here, you are supposed to be doing right about now. Why is that switched? Or, hey, have you noticed that you look like you guys have a conflict here? Taking the time to put those questions together so that once you get into the meeting, that's what I said, the leadership team, they're the facilitators. They're the ones guiding the process. They're the ones trying to pull the information out and create that engagement. So that takes preparation. You can't just go in blind. Other things to look at. Do you have weekly work, or I'm sorry, do you have workable backlog? Do you have constraints that are going to be on here that we need to start identifying? Are you clear to be able to do this? So I actually suggest that most of my project teams have like a half-hour meeting the day before or the morning of, where they not only review the weekly work plans, but they figure out who's going to capture things on the constraint log in the parking lot, who is going to talk about the 6-week look ahead vision and what are they going to say? What are we going to talk about for our plus deltas from last week? Just so that we can do a really quick, keep that meeting efficient and keep the discussion going. So preparing for that is really important.
All right. Anything else there, Julie?
No, I think I will kick it back. Unless you've got anything to add.
No, that's great. Before jumping here into mistake 18, there's been a few questions. So before we get too far away from some of the other stuff that we're talking about, I'll go ahead and throw those out there. From Tristan Hedges says that finding that filling out sticky notes in advance can be hugely beneficial. And I agree. And I think I was the one who said that was one of the mistakes. It's usually only a mistake if you haven't done the prep session prior to that, because a lot of times everybody just thinks in their own terminology, and you can have a bunch of differences, right? Somebody puts, oh, I'm doing stuff from column line 1 to column line 2 and column line 3 to column line 4. Somebody else puts down, I'm doing area A, and somebody else says, I'm doing the north side. And it's almost impossible to get those things put together if they're not all speaking the same language. So one of the things in the pool plan prep is to get everybody speaking the same language. And I don't care whether it's French or Russian or Chinese or Japanese or English, but we're all going to speak the same language, right? So we're all going to call it the same thing. We're all going to call it area A, right? On our sticky notes and everything, so we can see the area A or the level 1 or zone 2. Doesn't matter, but everybody's got to speak the same language. So often we don't do the prep, and people fill out sticky notes with whatever they think the areas are, and they're completely useless because it's like the Tower of Babel. You can't, everybody's speaking a different language, and you have to throw them all out and kind of start over. However, the flip side of that is if you are ready, you've talked about the areas, everybody's calling it the same thing, everybody knows the activities, the relationships, we're all calling it. The other thing too is calling activities the same thing. Even somebody might put down sheetrock and somebody else writes drywall, right? And then some, that's a simple one, but sometimes you can have trouble tying these two together with what they're asking for. So that's the only danger with the in advance, is not having that preparation. So I'll answer that one. Another one was if not using swim lanes for trades. Well, we talked about that one. That's the one, Eileen, you threw out there from Matt Collins. Another one was from Jorge Rinson.
David, I'm going to interrupt you. Please don't say names. That's against our privacy policies.
Oh, sorry. Apologize. I like to encourage people to do it. But sorry, I won't do that anymore. So when it says, when you do a pool plan in a virtual format, how do you recommend keeping the trades engagement when they're not in the same room? So one is cameras on, right? So everybody's cameras are on, and that helps keep engagement. And then you have to be a good facilitator and call things out and say, okay, so-and-so, you're on deck. As we finish up this little bit of mechanical, electrician, you're on deck, so you're prepping them to put down their iPhone if they're doing goofy stuff, and and pay attention. And you know, a lot of times you'll get that. You'll be talking to somebody, I'll be talking to Sean, and all of a sudden Sean will say, can you repeat what you just said, Dave? Obviously Sean wasn't listening to what I was saying. It's tough. People have distractions, but I also say, you know, set your stuff aside, focus for a couple hours, turn off your other devices and close your other windows, and really focus on what you're doing. So that's one of the important things to keep that going. Examples of phases. I know Julie and I both, and Sean both talked about different phases. So for design phases, for construction phases, a good way to identify your phase is by what Julie said was the length of work. It may be a demolition phase if you're in renovation. It could be a production phase if you're in the structure or the rough ends or the mechanical, electrical. So typical phases that we pull are typically like setup, like site clearing, site utilities, building the building pad, right? All the site prep and dirt stuff typically on buildings. Then you got structural, then you got concrete and steel, whether it's a steel frame, concrete frame. Then you move into dry-in. Dry-in's a typical phase. And then along with dry-in, you have rough-in. Those are usually kind of happening at the same time, but you definitely want to pull those separately, like Julie said. And then you'll have finishes, right? Your flooring, your paint, your casework, and then you'll have sometimes startup and commissioning, right? Those are your typical building ones. There may be others. Sean, Julie, do you have anything else to add to that? What are the phases?
I would say that I hesitated to jump in earlier when a lot of this conversation was taking place. Remember the note that was given early on, I think it was one of Dave's original notes, which is understand the critical handoffs when looking for phases in places where work transitions from one hand to another. That's one key look at this. But another key look at this is, and David's comments make me think of this, it's always project specific. I've never been comfortable with anybody who says, I got 32 sections worked out on a sheet and every job has these 32 sections in it, and it's all crap. You can build 2 public schools on 2 identical pieces of ground right next to each other in the same town, in the same location, with the same crew, same trade partners, same supply chain, and the 2 things can turn out radically differently for a whole bunch of unseen reasons that we don't know, right? So just an understanding of that helps.
Sure.
With all of
knowing that they're different, but being able to chunk projects out into something, and like Julie said way back in the milestones, back in one of the earlier mistakes, was what releases work to others. That
yeah, exactly.
Something that you're working towards.
Or when they were talking about creating swim lanes, another thing we do pretty regularly is if you have a complicated site campus or site, you can have the main building going on, and you have 2 outbuildings, and you have a whole bunch of underground that's being done. Plus, you have this project you're doing along with the Army Corps of Engineers, which is to rework the waterways, which are on the other side of the property, and all this stuff is going on concurrently. And so we have swim lanes for each one of those major kind of effort sequence. Yes. When things are tied together, we do this sometimes in MEP. Sometimes we'll take the entire MEP package out, or portions thereof, or the sprinkler package out, portions thereof, and then do these separately because they're so complex within themselves. But we'll keep a separate set of swim lanes for them. They'll fall into line in the sequential, following up above, you know, in between the proper milestones. But again, there'll be many lanes down, and they're only special group. But what I was going to say was everything's different. You know, David laid out the first one. Sometimes you're doing a high-tech project, laboratory or something like that, right in between top of grade and the beginning of structural is all the underground piping that has to go in, and that's 3.5 months worth of work. And that's got its own, I mean, so it's all project specific is all I'm trying to say. Yep. And so that's why you need the key players who know their roles to get together at the very beginning and lay all this out. I need such and such to do such and such. Those are the conversations I referenced earlier.
Yep. One more question here, and then we'll get back to the mistake 18 here. The question was, what percentage of time would you say should be utilized for make-ready planning on a weekly basis? Julie, you want to take that? I got some ideas too I'll throw in, but I think that was kind of your slide.
So as far as the plan, it depends on what you're talking about for make-ready planning. So there is the identification of the constraints in a weekly meeting. I would suggest setting aside about 10 minutes to say, here's what the vision is, let's talk through it. But also part of that is doing the update of what has happened since last week, what's been cleared, what's been taken care of, what's gone over, and what do we now have to follow up on. I would go and say, again, if you're in that weekly meeting and trying to make it about 10 minutes, plan for that so you don't go through every single constraint and have a conversation with the champion about every single one of them, and that'll be your whole meeting. So think that through. But in addition to that, at every daily huddle, there should be a couple of minutes dedicated to, hey, since yesterday's daily huddle, these are the things that have been cleared. These are the things we're doing for those. And does anyone have any new constraints that needed to be added? As far as the leadership team goes, and the last planners, as they get better and better at this also, when you're having any kind of session, pull plans, weekly meetings, daily huddles, anything, you need to train yourself to be listening for constraints that get said. Because I may ask, what are the constraints? And everyone may look at me like they have no idea what I'm talking about. And for the next 25 minutes, all anyone talks about are the constraints that are standing in their way. And so you need to take that time and be able to identify it, pause it, and take it. So there's not really a good number for the week of how much time, but that's what I would say. That's how it would be distributed throughout the week.
Yeah, I agree with for the meeting when you're talking about them and updating them about 10 minutes on constraints. Again, constraints are a gold mine to projects going smoothly, going fast, staying in flow. That's really one of the key three things. I always say there's three key things that you got to do. You got to do a pull plan to get everybody, what we say, singing out of the same hymn book, everybody marching in the same order, understanding who's doing what and when. Then the second thing is the constraints, right? Active, diligent constraint management is key to keeping projects in flow, and removing those roadblocks or constraints prior to the work getting there is so critical, and doing it well in advance, not the day it's needed, but well in advance is so critical. And the third is the huddles. The third is daily huddles as far as learning and having these discussions. Those are the big three. If you're doing those three, you're 80% of the way there with a lot of this stuff. Those are the key ones. But then the make ready planning kicks off each week with the updated 6-week look ahead. So when the updated 6-week look ahead, typically, now I've got some international stuff that they're doing 12-week and 20-week look aheads because it takes that long to get a light bulb from the US to Africa. But for us, US, typical 6 weeks, going through that is a process, and you're always adding a new week. So I like to think of it kind of as a radar, where you got week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you finish a week, you always add a new week. So you want to be really diligent on the outer edge of your quote unquote radar when that new activity pops up onto your radar screen that's 6 weeks out. Then we want to really dig into it, like, oh, we're starting the parking garage in 6 weeks. Okay, do we have all the mix designs? Do we have all this? Do we have all the rebar submittals? You know, all the different things. So then the other part of make ready is weeks 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 as they get closer and closer to your ship. So you need to be revisiting those and making sure those constraints have been removed. So just kind of repeat a little bit of what you said there, Julie. Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going. I think this one's mine. Mistake 18 is focusing solely on the PPC score. I like when jobs are aware of their PPC score, but some kind of get wrapped around the axle and want to just talk solely about PPC. Or they think they passed or failed. Oh, we were 78% last week, or we were 86, or we were 52. Okay, it's an indicator, but I've also seen projects that are in the very high PPC, 80s, 90s, and they're in trouble because the things that are getting them are really throwing them off schedule and out of sequence. I've also seen jobs in the what we would consider low PPC, 40s and 50s, that would seem to be just kind of muddling along, but they're actually doing fine because all of the critical stuff that they're getting yeses on, and all the no's are just, you know, noise or little inconsequential items. So it's not an absolute indicator. Julie, you had something to add to that?
Can you say what PPC stands for?
Oh, percent plan complete.
And I want to jump in and talk about some of the stuff we don't talk about, which is when we have people fudging their PPC because they think they're making the number looks better when they have to go have an owners meeting at the end of the month. And unfortunately, that is not an uncommon occurrence.
Nope.
And so there's a lot of misunderstanding relative to what PPC score means. What we do need to, in a lean environment, understand is transparency is what it means. We don't care what the number is. It's an indicator. It's like a odometer on a car. It's like a speedometer on a car. We don't care. There's no limit. We need to know what it is, so that we need to know what adjustments we need to make. And one other quick reminder, without a lot of detail about it, being ahead of schedule is just as bad as being behind. What we're looking for is reliability and predictability, the least amount of variation, and the reliable making of commitments. In other words, I said I could do this much this week, and when we got to Friday at 3, I did it.
Right. And to kind of key off what you said, Sean, yes, projects that are behind are in trouble. Ones that are getting done early because we had better planning, we had better, sharper, tighter coupling of the different activities is a good thing. So the way I like to put that is, in any variance we want to focus on and ask why, right? So if we're done early, like Sean said, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a variance, and it could be an indicator that maybe we want to do some, maybe we want to change our schedule a little bit because this activity is going much faster than we thought it was back in the full plan. So going faster is not necessarily a bad thing.
If you plan to go faster and you went faster, that's fine. What I'm saying is unplanned going faster. Understand that you, as one crew rushing ahead to look good, to make the completion for the end of the month for somebody else, may have screwed up their schedule.
And you painted somebody else into a corner because you threw up all the framing and there was no ductwork put in. Yeah,
right, exactly. And that's what I'm talking about. So I should be more specific, but we're trying to be quick here, so I apologize.
So back to the bullet points on 18, discussing the major variances from the prior week at the weekly meeting. That's a good thing. That's a good kind of rear view mirror. The key, though, is to discuss them at the huddles. I think, Julie, you said that, was you've got to be tackling these things daily, not at the end of the week in a rear view mirror. That's a mistake. You can summarize them and discuss them, though, weekly, just to see kind of a temperature check on how we're doing. But information has a half-life, so you want to jump on it that day, because a day goes by, you forget. Look at the countermeasures, right, in those daily huddles. What did we do to keep it from happening again, right? That's a valid question. Like, okay, hey, this happened. Hey, they sent the wrong piece of rebar. What are you doing with your rebar fabricator to make sure that they've got the right drawings, or that we get the right parts and pieces when we need them? Ask the 5 whys for your tough issues. For your everyday common things, like this didn't show up or the truck was late, okay, you're not going to stop and do a 5 why. But if you have recurring ongoing issues that you're constantly fighting, really dig into them with root cause analysis, and the 5 whys, to really drill down, asking why again and again and again to really get to the root cause. Don't accept one who. They say there's 2 kinds of companies: the ones that ask 5 whys and the ones that ask one who. Number 19, being soft.
And we know where that one who is going, by the way.
Oh yeah.
At the end of that, like, we know why they're looking for one who.
Right. They want to hang somebody. Mistake 19, being soft or giving partial credit when calculating percent plan complete, PPC. It's natural to want to kind of encourage people and like, oh, I don't want to be too hard on them because they're really out there working hard and they did it. And he got done early. I don't want to give him a no because then his boss might think it's a bad thing. And that's what I would call kind of being soft. Your activities must be very specific and measurable, right? You need to be able to go out there at the end of the week on Friday or whatever your last day of your week is and say, did I get done what I said? Yes or no? The no's, like the third bullet says, are not always a bad thing, right? Sometimes no's can be a good thing. Like, hey, we thought it was going to take us 5 days. It only took us 3. And now for the rest of the job, we're only going to put in 3 days for that activity. So we can advise the other trade that they can come in 2 days earlier.
Dave, let me jump in real quick and emphasize something.
Go ahead, Sean.
Sometimes we have to teach people how to say no. I think that statement's being understated. No's are critical. If you can't make a commitment at your weekly, you need to be able to say, no, I can't make that commitment, because the rest of the crowd needs to understand why not. I was waiting for something, it didn't show up. This got stuck. They're on a truck. The fabricator didn't. Whatever. It doesn't much matter. The point is, if you're working as a network and a unit, which is what Glass Planner system encourages, then saying no becomes critically important. It is not a failure. This is part of the understanding of the subtle differences in a lean environment, which is that we don't assign blame, we reassign risk and reward. That's really what goes on here. So it's not a blame scenario. That's not your screw up. That is a piece of information that is critical for us to know so we can understand how to what? Mitigate, ameliorate, work around, which is not a word we particularly like to use, but nonetheless, what happens if the door delivery didn't show up this week and I have 9 carpenters on site?
Yeah. And then what are your the no's versus the complete yes or no. But
right.
Sean, your point is to, I think, reliable promising, that you have to have that ability to say,
exactly,
I can't do that in that sequence because of X, Y, and Z.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you one more time before you go to the last bullet on mistake 19, because we're going to go back to mistake 18 really quickly.
Sure, I can do that.
I think it's mistake 18. Yes. What do you mean by one who? Somebody wanted to know specifically, because 5 whys is a good thing. One who is a term that I personally had never heard before. I can guess, but I don't know the specifics. So this person wanted to know, what do you mean by one who?
It's what you think it is. It's headhunting. It's looking for, what happened. Oh, it was why didn't we get the pour made or something? And oh, it's those rod busters. Oh, I'm gonna get those rod busters. They didn't get the stupid pour done. I'm gonna go, kick that foreman and all that kind of stuff. It's hunting for a simple pinning it on a person or a company.
Blame it, yeah.
Versus drilling in what was the reason why the rod busters didn't get finished? Oh, because the steel showed up late. Why did it show up late? Oh, because there was a late change. Oh, why was there a late change? Oh, the design team didn't realize that the frame was ahead of schedule and they thought they had more time. Right. Drilling down, right? So it's one who, right? It's headhunting to find somebody to nail the problem to, right, and make them pay for it, kind of.
And then the problem supposedly goes away until it happens next time someone gets hurt.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, you guys. I apologize for interrupting, but I thought we should get to that question before we went too far past it.
No, it's perfect.
I think it's critical understanding.
About 10 minutes for some more Q&A. What was that, Sean?
I said, I think it's a critical understanding, Eileen.
Yeah,
it's a good thing you bothered to ask.
So the counter, the fix to mistake 19, that last bullet, is being tough on your grading and on your scoring. It really helps people to sharpen their planning skills. So they really think about why they got those no's and what can they do about them next week so they don't get no's, so they get more yeses, right? Become more reliable, have less variation. That's what we're shooting for.
Continuous improvement.
Exactly. Back to the very beginning, continuous improvement and respect for people. Mistake 20, running meetings running late or running long. That's just kind of unacceptable in the way I look at it. Always start and end your meetings on time. If people are coming in or showing up late, you start without them. I've had clients that they'll lock the door of their trailer at 9:30 when the meeting's supposed to start, and you don't even get to sit in on the meeting because you're not in. The biggest way to do that is the second bullet, using that written parking lot. So a parking lot is just an area on a whiteboard where you're able to quickly stifle a conversation or shut it down and say, okay, Julie and Sean, you guys are going on and on about this. I'm going to put it in the parking lot. So I'm respectfully saying your thought or your discussion is not unimportant. I'm not saying, hey, you guys just shut up. That's not important. That's not being respectful. But saying, hey, Julie, Sean, you're going to do this, and I'm going to put it in the parking lot. You guys are going to talk about it after the meeting.
Right. This is not the proper venue for that conversation.
Right. That's all. Or it violates the 2-minute rule. So sometimes in meetings, that is a good place, and they are talking about something, and I'll give it a minute or two to work it out. But if it looks like it's not going to get resolved in that 2 minutes, then I'm like, okay, time out. Let's throw that in the parking lot. Right. The last piece is using each other to hold yourself accountable, right? Have things like, I should be saying, hey, Julie, you and Sean need to put that in the, and have the team members calling each other out to say, hey, that really should go in the parking lot, is a respectful way to shut that down.
Yeah, it's similar to being able to identify those constraints, identifying when something should go into the parking lot, being able to hear it and stop the session and record it.
Right. Does everyone listening to this know what an Elmo is? I know that Eileen does because she pulls them on me all the time.
Since you brought that up, it's probably best to explain it.
That's why I'm doing it. There's something called Elmo. It means enough, let's move on. That's the same thing that's in that last bullet point that Dave was talking about. It's not a matter of being tough. It's a matter of delivering what we intend. The whole subject for another entire conversation, but in my view, that is critical to an understanding of the lean paradigm shift. It is, can we make our actions match our intent?
Okay. Julie, finish this up with 21, and then we'll go to some more questions.
Okay, this is the last one, everybody. And another one that's near and dear to my heart. And really the idea of this, number 21, failing to conduct regular onboarding and maintenance trainings. And if you think about it, or if you've ever seen it, I've seen a lot of teams do it. At the beginning of a project, we spend a lot of time giving training, doing pool plans, doing major planning and team building. And then later on, when a team member leaves and another one takes their place or someone new comes on, everybody gets handed an Excel spreadsheet and told to come to a meeting on Thursday. And they're not given that same foundation that the rest of the team was given, which is a real shame. And so what I try to drive my teams to do is spend time at the beginning making a plan for how those people are going to be brought on. So first of all, when new members come on one at a time, making sure you have an agenda and know who's responsible for providing that agenda to them, to give them that foundation, even if it's only 20 minutes or a half hour, making sure they at least understand what's going on. And then if those new members are coming in, try to get them into that weekly planning cadence 2 weeks prior to starting. Get them to come to the meetings, get them to come to the daily huddles, so when they get there, they know what to expect. And then finally, conduct intermediate phase training. So, you might do that big one at the beginning of the project and the kickoff. And then once you start moving into construction, you do another one after design. And then you get into, once you're moving from rough in to finishes, you do another big training so that you're picking up all these other people, as well as providing maintenance for the people who are actually already on the team. Do a, remind them, let them go through it again, let them be part of training the new people and continue to grow and improve in their use of it. Remember, lean is, all of these things. You can do an 8-hour training, but this isn't a car wash. I mean, you're not suddenly going to be lean because you came to this webinar, because you had a boot camp or you did something like that. It requires constant coaching, support, maintenance, and really encouragement and team building for the team to keep the motivation up and to keep the wheels spinning in the right direction for lean. So that is all that I have to say, and that is number 21. So I think we're ready for questions in our last 6 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, well, we have several questions to go on our last 6 minutes. I want to remind everybody now's a great time to put in those plus deltas. Again, those of you who aren't familiar with the term, pluses are things that you thought added value. Deltas were things that you think we could have done to add more value, wishes you think we should have talked about more, you wish we wouldn't have talked about at all, things you wish we would have gone into more detail about. Go ahead and put that into the questions box as well. As everyone mentioned, we want that in the spirit of continuous improvement. So our first question is, can you give examples of constraints people don't typically think of? Usually we see RFI responses, submittals, lead times. What are some good examples of others?
I'll jump in. I've actually got a team that we took Post-it notes and we put all of them, like permits are one, inspections that you need to get, long lead items, RFIs, decisions from the owner, decisions from the neighborhood. I mean, those are the things you can kind of nudge people on. There are others that are out there that are probably one-offs or don't come up very often. And that's why it's so important to create that vision of where you're going to be, so that instead of trying to say, hey, do you need any permits? Do you need any RFIs? Do you need any submittals? Instead, you're saying, you're going to be doing this work. Can you? And what would stop you from being able to do it? And that's kind of how you shake that tree and get those things out. I don't know if you guys can think of any truly unique constraints that are out there, but I mean, there are different things on every project.
I can think of tons, and I would like to categorize them under, because we don't want to talk about them nor make light of them, but when Eileen asked that question, I had 2 incidences come to mind, both of which involve accidents where no one got hurt, but they were quite serious. And one of them was when on a very large continuous pour, one of the trucks went off the side of a mountain. So, it's that kind of stuff. So that's an understanding of that. I don't bring this up lightly. An understanding of the fact that we work in one of the single most dangerous trades under some of the most high stress scenarios. We have a death and injury rate that rivals the US military in full operations, if not exceeds it. We have issues of pressure and all types of other things going on. So an understanding of this is absolutely necessary, and a full understanding of the environment in which we work is also critical to understand. But all of this reminds me of things Greg Howell used to talk about, which is the unexpected, the unforeseen, and the unknown, right? And because part of the whole business of practicing lean within itself was something that stood out that he said to me in the 80s, which was, if you look at this like a metronome of width, where something's swinging from one side to another, if we can narrow the width that it's swinging is the width of the unknowns that we're facing. If we can narrow the width of the unknowns and decrease the amount that the metronome is swinging, we've decreased our risk substantially and on all kinds of levels.
All right, thanks, Sean. We got to keep moving with some questions. So Eileen, are you gonna keep going with them? Well,
Yes,
we'll
I
try to
am.
keep it very concise because I just see there's a lot that came in right at the end. So let's try to get through as much as we can.
What are your takes on having templates created for virtual planning sessions?
Absolutely critical for keeping them quick and focused. Have those templates, have those little areas. When I started doing templates, it was what I would normally be putting on a flip chart and just lay those in there, put in drawings, get it as organized as you can, makes those pull plans go much smoother.
Okay. Our next question is, who is authorized to give credit when calculating PPC?
Julie, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, I don't, the yes, no, as Dave was saying, this should be a process that's happening on a daily basis in the huddles. So depending on who is kind of facilitating, running that session and going through and asking about yesterday's work, today's work, and the yes, no is really a group decision. Hey, did that get done as it was supposed to be or not? It's not really a deeming of whether it was done or not. It's the discussion. And then if the answer is no, it wasn't done according to plan, going through that 5 why discussion and saying, well, why was it? So
generally it's the superintendent, right, Julie? It's generally the superintendent is giving the yes or no's.
Lead designer, one of those things.
Or lead design, yep.
Right.
Fantastic. Again, please put in your plus deltas. We've gotten some great ones, but in the spirit of continuous improvement, we'd love to have that feedback from you. If we find out in our weekly work plan that the planned duration for an activity is quicker, the example of the 3 days versus the 5 days planned, and we adjust that activity for the rest of the schedule, what is the best practice to update the bigger pull plan session without touching other trade stickies and getting everyone else updated?
Typically, I'll take this one. It should be an update to your, and what typically happens is the pull plan, the sticky notes, and whether they're virtual or in person doesn't really matter. That plan then gets put into scheduling software, and that then gets updated every week. Every week it's updated. So if your pull plan was based on 5 days, 5 days, 5 days, and you figure out, oh, now it's 3 days per area, if you make that adjustment in the schedule, it'll show it pulling up, and then that becomes the new updated piece, right? So it's the reissuance of the 6-week look ahead is where that's then broadcast back out to the team that this activity is going faster.
How do you effectively hold refresh trainings without delivering the same content you've delivered before?
Get a good trainer. We would hold on large long-term projects, we would hold intermittent trainings all throughout. 2-3 year projects, we would hold them 3-4 times a year. Get a variety of people there. I wanted to say this earlier when Julie was commenting on something really critical on one of her slides. Again, along with the concept of the fact that it's not just techniques and all the rest of this kind of stuff, a lot of the training involved in helping teams become better at working together with one another are psychological games and experiments and explorations that can be done. And that is a whole bag of tools and utensils that we as coaches have and use regularly when we're dealing with large groups, companies, lean transformations within. I was with the head of one of the larger construction groups in the United States walking out of a head bashing meeting years ago in California after a crisis. And the guy turned around and looked at me and said, I'd have done a hell of a lot better with a master's degree in psychology than with a PhD in civil engineering, dealing with kind of the stuff that we're dealing with here. So, I mean, there's a lot to this, and there's a great deal of depth to the training and the learning. It's almost endless. And so I would say, actually, there's so much that it's hard to keep up with, frankly.
So Eileen, I know we're getting close to time. Are we able to run over? I'm able to. I think most of us are. We can stay on and answer more questions.
I was just about to say thank you everyone for attending. We're going to run over a little bit just to answer some more questions. For those of you who are not able to stay on with us, again, this is being recorded. A copy of the recording and the slide deck will be sent to all participants. So thank you so much. Our next question is, are there other mistakes that we can learn, and what are the sources, the resources that they can go to? Books, websites, What do you guys think?
Big question.
I think there are a lot of mistakes that we could make. And I think at the beginning of any implementation, we make more of them probably than we realize we're making. The best and obviously the most timely resource that I think is out there is having a coach, somebody who's there and can help you identify it and brainstorm ways to improve. Besides that, there's LCI, obviously, different books that are out there. Trying to list the mistakes we could make could probably take all day, but just seeking out somebody who's been there. I mean, I'll tell you, I've been doing this now since like the year 2000, and I still make mistakes. So they are there, and I think it takes a team to really identify them and figure out how can we improve going forward. And so that would be my advice on that.
I have a lot of suggestions. I just want to make a couple of quick ones. One is, there isn't a project I've done in the last 20 years where we haven't built a project library. I mean, if it's an IFOA, high intensity lean engagement, and we've bothered to create a big room and all the rest of that kind of stuff, we build things like project libraries. We get everything from this is lean and all the basic books all the way up to stuff that are specialty. We put them in a big bookcase in the corner of the room, and we encourage reading. We encourage lunches together where people will sit and talk about latest ideas. We bring in people who will present. We bring in so-and-so who's coaching, who was just with somebody else, and they just came back. So-and-so just went down and toured the Toyota factory at such and such place. I mean, it's endless, but there are enormous resources that can be called. The coaches group that the three of us belong to, it was 2 years ago, I think we decided to try and create a list. There's at least one list that has 100 books on it. And there are others that everybody creates if you want to get more specialized. But, you know, reach out to any one of us. LCI is a wonderful resource. Eileen and everyone that works at LCI is an equally wonderful resource. They publish, collect. We used to have massive papers on site at the LCI website. I mean, the resources here are huge and very available.
Okay. Our next question is, you guys had mentioned the 5 whys a lot. Dave, you had given a specific example. Instead of the 1 who, you had mentioned the 5 whys. What happens after the 5 whys?
Sometimes there's 7. Sometimes there's 9. Sometimes there's 13.
Sometimes you can get it at 3 or 4, but usually it takes at least 5.
Yeah.
But like Sean said, it may take 7. Well, what happens is then you found the root cause. You found the thing that's causing the variation or the problem, and you fix it or you kill it. You kill that problem, whatever it is. It's not having the correct drawing, so we were sending out wrong materials. So now we've fixed the problem. We got to the root cause, that it was a drawing issue, and we got the person online, or we got them access to the active folder that they can now always have the up-to-date documents, and that kills it. That fixes it. Right. So the only way to fix it is to get to the root cause. Otherwise, if you're just treating some symptoms, and the underlying stuff may still keep going on.
I do want to add here, just for enjoyment, and I have no idea if this is a true story or not, but the story I got told years ago by someone far smarter and more senior than me was that it comes from a line that Dr. Shingo had, which is so Japanese and beautiful to me that I think it bears worth repeating here, which is, if one asks why 5 times, one will certainly arrive at the answer. I happen to think that's a beautiful explanation for its purpose.
There we go.
Other questions, Elaine? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. One of our biggest issues is getting trade partners to accept the necessity of time commitments, labor costs, required to make the pool planning sessions really beneficial and valuable. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Unless I fully caught it. Can you say it, read it again?
Yes, I will. One of our biggest issues is getting trade partners to accept the necessity of time commitments, labor cost in parentheses, required to make the pool planning sessions really beneficial and valuable. Do you have any suggestions on that?
To accept the time commitments.
Yes, to accept the necessity.
Like to realize how important it is that they have to come with time commitments.
And can I broaden this ever so slightly, which is, how do we help deter incalcitrance and inertial resistance on the part of trade partners who are unwilling to buy into the lean paradigm because they do not have a zone of psychological safety or vulnerability based trust built up within the group?
That's a little too broad for this webinar right now and the time that we have.
But I'm bringing it in very intentionally, because part of the root to that question lies in that field.
Of course, absolutely. But let's get to this question that we have now. Dave, do you have any suggestions on that? Or
Julie, I
Julie?
think you had something more
Yeah, you did.
on the tip of your tongue
Who, me?
with the trades. Yeah, did you?
Oh, well, I was going to say one of the biggest things for trying to make sure they understand how important it is what you were saying before, sending something out about 2 weeks before, including in that a real understanding of why we're doing this, why we're doing the trainings, why we're doing the pool plans, and the, idea that if that training is good and they understand the purpose of the pool plan, that should help them to understand the purpose of providing good information. So
Yeah.
I always say last planners, the idea of the last planner system is that they are the ones who know their work the best and can make the best commitments. But if they don't have the authority to give those commitments, then the project manager or somebody else from their team needs to be there with them so that you have someone who can commit and somebody who's there in the field who's going to be directing the work.
Yeah. And to add on to that, and the cost that came in that when the parentheses in cost is, well, that's one of the, I don't know, it's not really a shortcoming. It's just not what Last Planner was designed for. It wasn't designed to say whether you are productive or not. It's designed to say whether or not you're reliable, right? And did you do what you said you were going to do? Last Planner doesn't really care if you did it with 2 people or 200 people. It really doesn't. It just says, did you get it done on Friday? It doesn't care if you did it with 1 person or 200. Now, the trade doing that work obviously cares very much that if they did it with 1 or 2 people, they did great. If they figured 5, and if they did it with 10 or 15 people, they lost their shirt. They lost money on it. So so having them understand that piece of it, it can be tough in pool plans, and that understanding too of, well, if it's 5 people for 10 weeks or 10 people for 5 weeks, that's the same thing. That should be the same cost, right? It's just an inverse. So those are some difficulties that you have to think through, but just understanding that reliability and having them knowing what their production rates are super important when they come to the plan. What's your output plan? Yeah.
Okay. Our next question is, how much should the owner participate on the daily lean meeting? The next comment is, they tend to push too hard and the subs are affected by this.
It's actually a really good question, and there's some subtleties to the answers to this one. It's key, in my opinion, that the owner understands that they're a partner in a lean engagement, which is a non-standard approach. But the desire to sometimes micromanage can be a problem. I think the answer to that lies in their appropriate times. There's appropriate meetings, and one of the keys to this, I think, was mentioned in one of the slides that David or Julie did, which was make sure the right participants are at the right meeting. We waste a lot of time in meetings, and we waste a lot of time having people who don't need to be in meetings. And the most efficient way of getting this stuff done is to have the critical players in the room. What I'm trying to get at here is there are times when the owner or the owner's rep or whoever's on that side has to be in the room to engage the buy-in and commitment for them to be responsive in the same manner that all the other players in the team are. Will Lichtig had a wonderful paper written in 2004, I think it was, for the American Bar Association, which said, when he pointed out, I think, 14 characteristics of a successful high-performance lean project, number 1 or 3 or something was the owner has to be responsible and responsive and a willing participant partner. So that role needs to be maintained. However, they, just like everybody else in the room, are one player with a large set of interests in what is going on in the project. They're not the only people that have the interest in what's going on. So the understanding of the times when the owner can inhibit the behavior of people at the table versus the times when the owner can contribute to the responses at the table needs to be understood pretty clearly, as a matter of fact, which is why an understanding of human psychology and how people react and fear response and all the rest of that stuff is important. But I think it's a very careful question to consider. I think the answers are, it depends on the project. And I think that should be derived by consensus as a quick answer to this question by the management team of the project, by the immediate project team.
Oh, good. Generally, the owners aren't in the day-to-day things. Correct. Or the owners' reps generally aren't in the day-to-day planning of the nuts and bolts and the bricks and sticks. It's really what they're responsible for, right? Is decision-making and timing of things and approvals. That's where the owners really have to do their part and bring the answers and bring the information and make those decisions, when they're needed. More so than just being there just to watch a concrete guy and a steel guy talk about anchor bolts. They don't care.
Right.
Like Sean said, it's at a different level, and I think it probably stifles conversations on a daily basis. Yep.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Now is a great time to get in those last minute plus deltas, so please go ahead and do that. The next to last question is, do you three feel, and I think I know the answer to this, that companies need full-time last planner facilitators or trainers for a company, or do you see it being done successfully with shared responsibility to keep up on training, onboarding, lessons learned, etc.?
Well, you're kind of asking a barber if you need a haircut. So
that's exactly how I thought. Why I thought I knew the answer to this question.
We're at the very least a barber for a haircut.
I was going to try to thread that needle a little bit more carefully.
Yeah.
If I can. You guys tell me if I'm on point or not. Lean behavior takes training. There's no question about that. Period.
You know what, Sean, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. Maybe I can clarify this question. It says, do you see it being done successfully with shared responsibility to keep up on training, onboarding, or lessons learned?
Right. Can we do it with our internal people, right, on the team,
right, and
as long as they're still doing all this stuff?
For sustainability.
Yes. It can be maintained with shared responsibility.
Yeah. And so I was going to answer that by saying,
properly trained.
Yeah. In the world of coaches and trainers, there's a lot of conversations about the benefits of both pro and con, benefits and problems with in-house trainers versus out of company trainers. Really serious companies that are going to try and perform lean all the way across the board need an interior lean administrator, coordinator, champion of some kind or another. And how that works is that's multiple. There are plenty of people to talk to all across the world who are trying to do this. I will recommend, though, that outsiders for perspective, objectivity, and the non-pressuring of what within company employees have to sometimes put up with to push programs through, it helps to have a combination of both, is where I'm going here. So we need to empower the people that are within our companies to make the decisions that they need to make reliably on a lean basis, trained, and reinforcing the training. And at the same time, you're constantly trying to up the level of your impact, the alignment of your intent with your product, right? And so that just is the continuous improvement factor. But I hope I'm answering that correctly, which is you need somebody inside to coordinate. You need buy-in at the top who'll push it constantly. But there are so many, one of the thinking keys behind this lean business is that a group of us arrive at a better understanding than a singular one will. Everybody brings their own unique perspective to the table, and getting as much perspective at the table to deal with a problem will lead you to a better solution to that constraint or problem than just trying to examine it by yourself. And I hope I'm being clear with this answer. And I hope whoever wrote that question, did I answer that question decently? Did you get my gist?
Yeah, it made sense to me. Thanks, Sean.
Okay. Our last question is, and this is a big one, so here we go. What is your advice on implementing lean at a late stage of a large project?
It all works anytime it goes in. Hal Maycomber may be the biggest champion of this that there is, David, because he's got a dozen stories about coming in, the project's 9.5 months late. They're supposed to complete in 3, the look ahead's 9 months, and they pull it in on the last day of whatever. There's no time that I'm aware of, and this is an honest statement, where the implementation of lean, high intensity lean engagement when applied to a job did not yield a change in the production curve for the better, period.
It is difficult, and I've been in several billion-dollar projects. Some I came in late and had wild success, and others I've come in late and it's been a real uphill battle. But to Sean's point, yes, we still made an impact.
Right.
But a lot of times we're brought in as it's like a rescue mission. Yep. And like, oh my gosh, hey, this project's 100 million over budget. It's 6 months late. Can we get it all back in one thing? And that's very hard to do. But it can be done. You can have influence at any stage. I will say that. But the later you do it, the more difficult it is.
Yeah, and I want to add this to David's comments. Oftentimes, and this is a discussion among all kinds of coaches all across countries, oftentimes we're not brought in until the fire is already raging. And there's a whole different view about, yeah, we're we preach against being fire putter outers. Like, just not how we're supposed to be dealing with change and emergency and variation and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But I do want to say that it's oftentimes at the last minute when the project's like way at the edge and something bad's going to happen that we do get called in, help, how can we do this? And we are hoping, I guess the best thing to say at this point is we're hoping that that changes a little bit, because the proactive approach to this, encouraged by the way and manner in which we plan and engage our personnel, should change part of that, so we don't have as many crises. And
I
hope it's helpful too.
I would add that obviously you're not going to have the same benefits as if you did it at the beginning. You know, your project isn't going to be as successful as it would have been. But I think the success of the implementation, whether it's in the middle of the project or the beginning of the project, really relate back to the exact same thing, which is the team's commitment to training, to coaching, to learning it, to improving, and to actually doing it. So if you have a team where somebody says, we're going to do last planner system because we're in bad shape, and the whole team goes, well, that's lovely, but that's stupid, and we're not going to do it, you're not going to get to where you need to go. But if the team says, yes, this is what we're going to move toward, and they do it together and they really implement it and commit to it, then you obviously are going to get that improvement that you're looking for and improve the outcome of that project.
I agree with Julie 100%. It's really well said. I should also say that there are 3 slides in 3 of the Lean Construction Institute presentations: business case for Lean, intro to Lean, and Lean in Design, all of which have the same slide, which basically shows without a doubt we have factual evidence of the fact that the longer into the design and production process of a project that you implement the change, the more expensive it'll be. The earlier that you implement it with more parties involved, the less expensive it'll be, and how it lays out. So I mean, that's a direct corollary, and that's not debatable.
You can actually find that slide on the research section of our website. If you go to leanconstruction.org, hover over learning, and then go down to research, you'll be able to find the business case for Lean, the business case for Lean in Design, and you'll be able to find that information right there. So Elsie, I would like to thank Julie, David, and Sean for presenting today, and all of you for attending. You will be receiving a copy of the recording and the slide deck. Thank you very much for bearing with us as we go over. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.